It's an important question. Are global finances in peril? The IMF and OECD warn public debt is hitting levels not seen since the hard years of recovery and repayment that followed the end of World War II.
Yeah, but how much debt is too much? Or is it less about the amount, but actually how we think about debt? CNA's Loke joins us with this report.
Anytime anyone said there's a trade-off, you want to use your credit card to buy more stuff, but remember you're going to owe more money, they didn't want to hear it.
Or you can choose not to hear arguments for fiscal austerity, but you cannot not see what any online search will show on how much countries have borrowed at one moment on one day in the month of December 2025. This one supplying every conceivable metric on the world's largest economy. Figures vary depending on which country or countries is or are included. But equally prominent on at least one site is this figure. Our interest puts a value on the contract between lenders offering credit and borrowers holding debt, allowing spending today on the promise of payment from what might only be earned tomorrow. We are able to spend today what we do not in fact have today because of this arrangement, which is credit.
The way to think about this is money is not just created out of thin air. Instead, deposits in the bank can then be lent out as credit. So the credit allows money to be multiplied 5-fold, 10-fold, 20-fold. And this credit, the other side of which is debt, is extended to corporations, households, and that's what circulates and leads to economic growth.
All right, but that's assuming that the money you borrow goes into what you have suggested, very productive segments of the economy.
For sure. And this is where debt and debt sustainability come in.
One needs to look at the efficiency of spending. And then, some debt is better than others. Some spending is better than others. If you only incur debt for consumption expenditures, you will not have that productivity effect that would pay back for the debt.
Debt is great. It's great to be able to borrow to buy your house or to buy stuff and to pay it back over time. It's great for the government to be able to borrow in a financial crisis, a pandemic, to deal with a recession, to pay for infrastructure. It's often much more efficient to allow debt to go up than to raise taxes. The thing is, how much do you let it go up?
So there is no magic overall number, but it depends upon the growth prospects of a country. It depends upon the revenue capacity, the capacity to repay that debt out of existing resources. It depends upon the composition of debt. Who is it owed to? Is it domestic versus external investors? It depends upon the country's own vulnerability to shock.
We're confronted with a trinity of risks. One is a geo-economic risk. We don't know whether we'll earn enough. Global trade is being threatened, so on and so forth. We've accumulated a huge amount of debt, and so we don't know whether the income can pay it off. That's one. The other is a lot of this debt was accumulated during a period of really low interest rates, whereas interest rates have risen and risen significantly so, which means the burden of servicing this debt has increased disproportionately.
At some point, markets say, well, this is not acceptable to us. We demand higher interest rates because of the risk that we see in the future path of debt. And that would then squeeze spending in the budget even more, because you'd have to pay more for servicing your debt than in the past. And that would then mean that politicians would have to get their act together to find those solutions.
Interest costs for the United States have more than doubled. They'll soon have tripled over a very short period, thanks to the fact that these interest rates have gone up. So that's number one. Number two is our debt relative to income is very high. So any measure of our debt picture doesn't look very good. It's really approaching or well past historic highs. And then maybe most importantly, because let's remember, at the end of the day, it's political. Neither party is prepared to think about anything that would bring budget deficits. That's how much you're adding to the debt each year into line.
Global debt is now on a steeper path than pre-pandemic projections. For about 1/3 of countries, they will see debt higher than pre-pandemic levels and rising faster. And these economies account for about 80% of global GDP, including the US, China, France, the UK, Brazil, and South Africa. Countries are currently facing a trilemma. So it's not just that they need to bring debt down, they're facing these massive spending pressures for economic security, to address population aging, among other factors. So these spending needs need to be accounted for, even as political red lines on taxation are becoming more entrenched.
I don't think we are in a crisis at this particular point, but we may drift towards one without the political control that it takes to adjust spending, to increase revenues in some countries, particularly the United States. The tax levels have been cut so far, especially on the rich, that there is now a real tax deficit for the United States. Some other countries should probably spend a bit less and become more efficient. But it is a crisis, not yet.
It is not accurate. It is in fact not useful to call this a debt crisis.
I would tend to agree. The fact is, usually we would be able to identify periods of stress and crisis much better when we look back rather than at the point we're in it. But by and large, yes, I think at this point, debt servicing is not a huge risk in aggregate, but it is a growing risk.
There's a big question mark as to where long-term growth prospects are headed. A second unknown is whether interest rates are going to remain higher for longer, or financial conditions are going to remain much, much more volatile. This also depends upon the geopolitics of it. This could have a huge bearing on countries' debt-carrying capacity.
If you cut interest rates now, it's not going to drive inflation up right away. These things take a long time. They're slow, they're insidious, frankly, much like tariffs. Tariffs don't necessarily cause huge growth damage right away, but over the long run, believe me, they do. We don't know how much debt is too much. It's just not known. We don't know what the limit is. But we do have historical experience and certain guideposts, and I think people who just say those are irrelevant, this time is different, are fools.
There's a lot we cannot know, but there's one thing we do know. From the last check on this figure, around 7 minutes ago, it's gone from this to this. It's a relative jump, but with very real cost. When the world has more debt than it has value, as the IMF warns will happen by 2029, that is tempting the fiscal gods. There can be too much of a good thing.
I think it's always fascinating that, debt levels, despite their importance, are quite overlooked. I mean, even in business news, when we talk about, the country's economic situation, we always look at stock markets, jobs, GDP, but we rarely really talk about debt.
Yeah, you're right. And I suspect the reason is because they're not so sexy. They're very slow, they're very abstract. You talk about like debt to GDP ratios, like, huh? Whereas for stocks, you're like, whoa, record high, record low. Absolutely, we get excited, about that kind of movement as opposed to something that's kind of creeping along, a little bit like climate change. Why people don't get excited about climate change. But I have to say, I've had a change of heart recently when I found out that the United States is going to pay this year interest payments of $1 trillion. Just interest payments, totally non-productive. So I'm very glad that you're here, Wei Su, because you've been looking at this, in depth. I'm wondering, how is it that when you make payments which are almost twice Singapore's GDP, payments which are bigger than America's defense budget, no one seems to be overly concerned. The bond markets, they're reacting a bit, but they don't seem to be overly, concerned about the situation. What is the US doing right, I suppose, to keep, panic at bay?
I think if you spoke, as I had to do with
the various experts, and they have been experts in various fields and serving different offices, they'd say, and I'd get to your point actually, Elizabeth, it's political. The mindset now is that we're fine with levels of debt like this, or at least the action suggests they're relatively. Although in Europe, you've seen recently Italy and Spain doing something to, in terms of fiscal consolidation. In the UK as well, we've seen moves that way.
Okay.
But the mood is there will be growth, and then this wild, and I'm sure you do this every day, wild grasping at artificial intelligence as that magic super driver of growth. We will get that growth in the future.
Okay. So everyone's basically convinced themselves that as long as we have growth, we have AI driving this current boom, it's okay to have high levels of debt. Does that kind of sum it up in a way?
Well, not these people who spoke to. They're saying, well, the risk is depending different degrees.
Yeah.
The risk is not immediately there, but I think the IMF, the deputy director of the Fiscal Affairs Department, she was warning. She calls it the IMF's debt trilemma. Right. So right now, the mood is not there to increase taxes. Yep. Cut spending, and certainly not increase spending in the right areas. The debt dynamics are no good, so interest rates going up, which means the servicing of debt will go up. There's always an adverse spiral there. So the harder it gets, the harder it will get in the future, and the harder it is right now. And there are structural spending necessities. Yep. So aging populations, most of us are facing that. Aging populations, healthcare, childcare, education. I think the US figures you quote, more spent on that than on defense, and therefore more spent on that than on education, childcare, investing in the future generation.
At the same time, they have tax cuts as well, right? Yeah, with the big, beautiful bill, right? Yeah.
Well, one interesting thing one of your interviewees had actually said was that actually a lot of debt was accumulated when interest rates were low. So I'm interested to know what happens when there is a need to raise interest rates. Although, in the US, we're seeing the president put pressure on the Fed there to keep interest rates low. But when interest rates have to go up, what will happen then?
Well, several things happen, as you well know. But primarily here, the servicing of debt just becomes that much more onerous. And the riskier it seems to lend to someone, the more you are going to be demanding in terms of cost, not just now, but also in the future. That's why we are seeing, was it last year, for a while, short-term, short maturity bond yields diverging from long, 2-year and 30-year, Okay, suggesting that looking into the future, they see greater risk in terms of whether or not people can service climbing levels of debt.
Okay.
And just to go back to the basics a little, why is debt such a significant part of economic growth these days?
Actually, I didn't know. I thought, I was just asking in the newsroom, so Sharon, who is really good on it, she said, but you need it. I said, but why? She says, you need it, you pay it off so that the next time you borrow, you get on you get good credit ratings so you can borrow on easier terms. Yep. So I said, but why not just pay off and don't borrow? She said, no, you need to borrow, but you need to borrow on good terms. So you borrow, you pay, and then you borrow again. But you pay it well, so the next time you borrow, you get on good terms.
So I think that basically is the crux of it, right? You have to borrow to get the growth that you want, you desire, to spend on infrastructure and so forth, but it's how you spend. It has to be spent wisely. It has to be productive. I mean, I think one of your guests talked about how it cannot just be on consumption. It has to be far wider. It has to be efficient.
Certainly not borrowing so that you can pay off, service your debt now.
So down the road, as you were saying, then you can borrow again on favorable terms and continue to pump the money into the productive sectors of the economy and keep growing, basically.
In fact, I didn't realize is that guest you mentioned, he said, well, there's a multiplying effect. So it's not just $1 becomes 50, becomes 50, if it is lent out, which I didn't think of.
And to take this in a slightly more nuanced way, there is also the difference between absolute debt, which is the highest in the United States, but it's not the highest when it comes to debt-to-GDP ratio. So can you sort of take us through the difference between the two and why that nuance is important?
So debt to GDP, so it's the amount of money a country owes in its entirety, as opposed to deficit, which is just what happens every year, to the value of a country's economy, so that's the GDP. So the US, as you mentioned, the last time the record, well, the last time we saw above 100%, so it was after World War II, and that happens because of war. And this is another concern now, which we didn't raise, which is there are times in which you should have debt, and you will have debt during war. And then after that, you need to pay it off. So the good years and the lean years. In good years, you need to be saving money and building your buffers. That's the IMF's point, because there will be bad years. So 106% for the US, debt to GDP after World War II. It fell to about 21.6% in the 1990s. Now it's back to almost 100%. The projections are beyond 100% in a few years. But President Trump says, we'll grow our way out of this.
Yeah, the economy will keep growing.
Big, beautiful growth will get out of this.
The best economy in the world ever.
Wei Su, thank you so much for that. We're talking with Wei Su about, really the question of how much debt is too much.